What's good? I'm Matt Jumper and I'm a framer designer developer. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the top 3 mistakes that I noticed every framer beginner makes and how you can avoid them. All right, so I have this super simple site I made in Framer and I have the canvas here and I turn on the guides here with Control G. You can toggle these on and off. And with these guides, you can actually see that everything here actually looks decent, right? Like there's no red flags. Just looking at this in the layout to be like, oh, this stuff is going to break. That's kind of the thing. It's deceiving. The most common mistakes that I notice are actually all in front of you here in this canvas. And most beginners won't really know anything's wrong until they preview their site and drag their browser out or in and kind of notice the responsiveness of the site. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to preview this breakpoint. And from here, this looks okay, because this is the exact breakpoint that I was designing on. So this is a direct reflection of what I was building. As soon as I drag this browser out, you'll notice some funky stuff happening. And it's easy to oversee this. So going out, we get black bars behind that image. We get the text just like anchoring itself to weird points. And if I drag it in, you'll see that we get these black bars again in the image. The text is still just anchored in weird positions. And the navigation at the top is actually like really skinny here. We have a lot of space on the outside. And also the width of this text is pretty narrow compared to the space of the width of the browser. And then we can go back in again to the next breakpoint where it's mobile. And this image is again super narrow. And this text is also narrow. The navigation is narrow. So it's kind of consistent what's happening here. Basically, the responsiveness is outside of those breakpoints, it's pretty bad. If I drag this in all the way, you'll notice that it's actually starting to cut off the content as well. And then across all these breakpoints, the other thing to consider is that it's very jumpy, right? When you go to each breakpoint. So we got to take that into consideration. So a lot of beginners think about responsiveness as basically like breakpoints, right? And they forget to consider every screen size in between. And ideally, you should be thinking about those spaces in between and making your site as fluid as possible. Okay, so coming in at number 1, and this isn't going to be like a reverse order where I like hype the way up to the biggest one. I'm starting with the biggest because it definitely like sets a foundation for everything else I'm going to talk about. But also, you probably already know what it is. It is using frames instead of stacks, and with that, using absolute positioning instead of relative positioning. So I'm going to get into it. Some background on frames and stacks. I think it's the most common mistake because of it being a mix of 2 things. One, it's just really easy to design in the canvas using frames and absolute positioning because it's literally like designing in an artboard. And 2, it's basically like the alternative of using frames is using stacks and relative positioning, which might just be a little hard to grasp. Okay, so we'll start with the basics. This hero frame is a frame, which is basically just a container or a div without any order to anything inside. No rules for how these layers are going to behave. So if I click on any of these items inside, the arrow, the text, the long text, the type here under position is set to absolute, and there's no option to change it. So relative to fixed or to sticky. If this was in a stack, all of these options would be available, including absolute. But with frame, you can only do absolute. So with this comes the ability to just move these things free for all, which sounds good in theory, but as I showed you responsibly is a nightmare, amongst a couple other nightmarish things that it brings. And also if I wanted to like change the order of available for hire and this text here, I have to like click on this, move it down, eyeball this spacing, drag this up, hopefully align it there. And then if I want to duplicate this text and like push this stuff down, I got to do this. And then like, it's a nightmare. Nobody wants to do this. Okay. So that's absolute positioning. And that's basically why it's kind of hellish unless you need it. It just makes more work for yourself. It's harder to keep things consistent and responsively. It can work, but it shouldn't be prioritized. Like you should be prioritizing using stacks and relative positioning. Okay, so let's fix this and let's turn this frame into a stack. So select it, go to layout and just hit plus, and Now to stack, you'll notice some of the elements just kind of shifted here. They're all center aligned. And if I click on this, I can click and drag the order of things, but I can't actually like physically move them. The reason for this is because now they are relative, and the hero stack here is dictating the order and the rules and the behavior of all these elements. So I can change some of this. The direction here is left and right. I could change it to up and down. I'll leave it for left and right for now. And the alignment, we can set it to the bottom just to match what we had before, where that arrow was at the bottom of the text. I can click and drag this back to the front so it's on the left. And the text here, we previously had it above this paragraph. So let's get it back there. Because they're all on the same level, you can't really change the direction of these inside unless you put it in a new stack. So I can take these two pieces of text and I can right click and hit add stack, and I can change the direction to up and down. You'll notice something shifted there, but because we're using fixed height and width, it's kind of capping the sizing. So if I click and drag this, you'll be able to see all of it. This itself is one of the rookie mistakes. Spoiler alert. I'll come back to this, but for now, I just want to show you or make sure that the text is visible, and we'll come back to the sizing. We can tweak some of the stack properties here. So the alignment, we can make it go to the left, and then the gap here, we can make it 16, just a bit more intentional and consistent. And then the hero here, we can add a gap of 288, and this will roughly bring us to where we were as far as the spacing goes. But again, the sizing, we'll come back to it. So this works. And then we can also click on the hero, and for the padding, we can add just bottom padding for now. So we can go to the right side here and add 64. So now that's always going to be 64 pixels of padding from the bottom, and it doesn't rely on like an arbitrary position of the text. Okay, so let's preview this. As I drag it out, it's fine. The alignment is good. Still some other issues we got here. They're not going to just go away because I also have some like overrides and some existing stuff in the responsive states. But as a foundational piece, the stacks is basically what we need to use to make a properly like fluidly responsive website. On the topic of absolute positioning though, I'm not against it by any means. Like, you need to use absolute positioning at some point in your site, I'm sure. It's pretty common. This button, for example, is just centered in a frame, which is totally okay. However, it is anchored on the left and the bottom. So when I drag this out, it's actually not always centered, but it is centered in the canvas. So to fix this, just make sure, a common mistake is that like you're using the wrong pins. So this one, it's pinning to the left and the bottom. We can just pin it to the center, and then now it's going to stay there. As I said before, I have some overrides here. If I just do this again on mobile, it's a bit more tedious. And again, another reason for stacks, you do it once and it's just going to stay that way. Number 2, fixed sizing. This is the second biggest mistake, or maybe the first, I don't know. This is honestly is probably the most common that I've seen. People love fixed sizing, again, because they look at it on their canvas and it looks good. And designers are kind of used to doing this in Figma because they just have to design a breakpoint. Here's desktop, here's tablet, here's mobile. You don't have to worry about in between. A lot of this right now will get fixed once we use get away from fixed sizing. So this stack here, I told you I was going to do that rookie mistake. I made the width and the height a fixed size and just like dragged it out. So let's fix this. Instead of fixed, your default for widths should be fill. Your defaults for heights should be fit. Again, there's going to be exceptions, but when you're making a piece of text, when you're making a container, this is what you should be thinking about by default. So this container now is filling the available space and it's fitting the content inside. I have to click now inside here to make sure everything's kind of behaving the same way. So this text is fixed. I'll make it fill. That text in particular wasn't like a huge red flag because it's always probably going to be smaller than the text below it, but I still can't have that. Like I need everything to be fill just to make sure that responsively it's not going to break. This big text, it's fixed at 1004. Let's make it fill. You'll notice it's breaking the guides here. That's okay for now, but the important thing is just making sure that the elements here are just filling the available space that it has. The button here is, it's fixed. I could even make this fit, and then it inherits the sizing of the sizing inside the component. And the hero here, the width is 100% relative, which is in this case equivalent to fill, and the height, it's a fixed height. Let's make it fit. We lost all the padding on the top because it wasn't actually padding, it was just a height, and it wasn't there's nothing there. So to add that padding back, we can use, say, 200 at the top, and now it's actually going to be always 200 from the top instead of like this text like creeping into the empty space. So now we're on our way to consistency. And then we'll just do a quick kind of resetting of overrides in mobile, because when you use absolute positioning in frames, you're doing a lot of manual work at each breakpoint, where when you use stacks, it's pretty minimal, and you're just kind of changing some properties of the layout and not like changing widths of things, moving things, stuff like that. So I'm just going to click anywhere I see this blue text here, it indicates there's an override. I'm going to reset it just for the sake of this exercise to like have a clean slate here and just show you like how much more work it is to maintain absolute positioning than relative and stacks. So once these are reset, we can jump back to desktop. I think we're good. For now, we're using gaps here, so I can just reduce this down. And then on the hero here, on mobile, we can just change this to up and down. You'll see how much more kind of responsive it is by default. The gap here, let's just extend to like 24. And again, the widths or the outside padding we'll get to in the next rookie mistake. But I can move this arrow down and we can change the alignment to the left. And generally speaking, like this responsiveness is so much easier, right? I reset those overrides and everything's just kind of working by default. Okay, so now let's see. Responsively, this is what I'm referring to when I say things are fluid. Basically, at any point, things look like it's a complete site and it's not like an in-between state, because this text is filling all the available space and there's no awkward breaks and weird spacing. Obviously, there is awkward spacing right now for the lack of padding on the outside, but that'll be our next point to get to. So on the topic of fixed sizing, as I showed you before, even with the image, as we drag this out and drag it in, still getting some awkward black bars, and even just like the ratio and stuff is a bit weird. So this stuff applies to images and frames as well, even when it's not just a stack with text. Frames and images, all that stuff still applies. So the way I have this set up is I have a body frame, and again, this is totally okay using a frame here. There's only a button inside and an image. You don't need to make that a stack. This body is, the width is fill, that's good. The height is fixed to 1200. So if we want this to take up like the full height of the user screen, instead of just kind of saying like, oh, most people's screens maybe is 1200, we can actually set to 100 viewport, 100 VH. This is actually going to be 100% of the screen, regardless of what that browser height is. So that's how to solve this. And then inside here, this image is actually, it's set to absolute, which is fine, but it's a fixed width and a fixed height. So if we make them both relative to 100%, then that's going to be 100% of the container, and this container is 100% of the viewport's height. So now as I preview this, it's always 100% height and width. So generally we're good, but the biggest thing here still is this width is too wide, right? We're going edge to edge, it's taking up the whole screen, which brings me to the next point. So now we're on number 3, neglecting the page structure. So when I say page structure, I'm speaking in this scenario specifically to basically consistency in the margins of the page, so like the outside padding, and having like a consistent container and like a max width on the site. So having a consistent layout structure is often overlooked and honestly can make your site feeling pretty janky. And sometimes people just don't know how to navigate this when they're used to using absolute positioning and don't think about like outside padding and stuff like that. So I know we made our hero take up the entire width here, and obviously we're not trying to do that. We want it to sit within these guides. So let's see what we want this max width to be. We can do this in two ways. You can go to the guides and you can do some math, and you can figure out basically this is 1440 minus 48, which is this margin, minus 48, which is that margin. And you can get that number. Or if you have guides set up, you can tap F and just drag this out, and you'll see that's 1344. And then delete that frame because it's in a stack. So now we can take the hero and we can apply this max width to it. So under min max, we'll go max width, and we'll do a fixed sizing, and we'll do 1344. And you'll notice now that we have a max width that actually is aligned with the navigation here, and these items are edge to edge, which is good. But we have these black bars on the side, and also if I drag this in, it's still like edge to edge, right? So a couple things we got to do here. One, we can get rid of the black background. It's black because the desktop here has a black fill behind it. So the hero, let's put this in another stack. And we're gonna do this for two reasons. So to do it, we can do right click add stack or option command return. And we want to set the width to fill. We'll just remove the gap. And then the color fill on it, we can set it to gray, which is what the hero was before. And then on this one, I can just remove it because it's not necessary having it twice. Let's name this hero container. And then now we fix the background, but it's still edge to edge. So here on the container is where we want to set the padding. And we can click on the isolated sides here and do right would be 48, left would be 48. And then we can go down to each responsive state and change this to whatever we have it set up as. For tablets, 40 and 40. For phone, it's 24 and 24. So now this is nice and consistent with the guides. So when we play this, it's good as far as this the hero text goes. A lot more fluid. So it's important to separate the container with the max width, because the container has the padding in it, and the stack inside is going to have the max width. If you have the padding in the max width, then you're basically reducing it like that number from the max width, which doesn't make sense. So just you need those two layers at all times. So we can do the same thing now to the navigation. So if you remember, the navigation right now is just a fixed size. So at this desktop, it's 1344. When it breaks, it's going to that fixed size, going to that fixed size, and even on the really small ones, it's getting cut off. So we'll do the same thing. We'll grab the navigation, and instead of a fixed width, we'll do relative, because this is fixed position. So you can't do fill. We got to do 100% relative width, and anchor to the top. So it's good. And then on tablet, we just have to reset the widths here. So I already have this set up where I have the navigation inside, and I can add a max width here. I'm just going to do it once to 1344. And the desktop, I can set it to the padding to 48. I can go down to tablet, drop it down to 40. Phone, drop it down to 24. And then I can just set the variance here. That's a common mistake. If you like set the responsive variant, but then don't actually apply it. Okay. So now, if I drag it in even to the smallest, that's still visible, not getting cut off. All right, and then one bonus mistake that I see some people make is not fully understanding how the breakpoints work in Framer, especially people that kind of stray from the default ones that are given to you. So for example, in this file, I have my desktop breakpoint set up at 1440, and then I created the standard tablet and phone breakpoints. However, the breakpoints after this desktop one, it's called tablet, and the next one's called phone. But this tablet breakpoint is happening 1 pixel below whatever this width is. So this is 1440. if I go to 1439, we're at the tablet breakpoint. And a lot of people don't realize that it works off that 1 pixel below. So when you're working on these bigger sizes, you basically need to do one of two things. One is adding another breakpoint, right? And you customize it, and then you put it in basically the whatever size in between here. So maybe it would be desktop small, and it would be 1200, which is like the default framer width. And I can move that beside tablet, and kind of annoying. I have to like manually drag these out. But then I could like reduce these, reduce this font, maybe reduce the padding here, or the gap, I mean. And then now you're back to basically these are the default framer breakpoints. And when I preview this, it's not so much of a jump when we get to the tablet. And the other thing to do also, like if, for example, like this layout, you don't necessarily need the 1440 breakpoint because everything's like fill and max widths. You could also just set this to 1200 and delete this breakpoint, and it would kind of be the same thing where you don't get that intermediate step, but then it won't break as soon, right? So in this case, it's still there until 1200, but then it just goes right to tablet. So two ways to approach it, but it's just a common mistake not fully understanding how these breakpoints work. So let's preview this out. So from the very largest all the way down, everything's fluid. Everything feels the way it should. Nothing is breaking. And we fixed all those common mistakes. All right, so I hope you learned something. If you did, or if you still want to learn something more that you haven't, drop it in the comment section below. Also, don't forget, I put out a Framer Masterclass with Flux Academy that is available now, also in the description below. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter or X. Anyways, see you guys soon.